My name is Maya Prabhu. I'm faculty at Yale University, and we have an amazing panel of people to talk about climate migration as a policy challenge, as a humanitarian challenge, and various perspectives on this. So I'll speak briefly about the issue of climate change, climate migration, so we can define the challenge that we're talking about. But I think what I want to sort of emphasize is that we have many people here because we need a polyphonic solution. There is no single set of interventions, and our speakers today will be discussing each of those things. So with great pleasure, I would like to introduce Rania Ahmed from the International Organization of Migration. Rania has spent 30 years working on looking at the challenges of migration at the intersection of other complex humanitarian and political disasters and in conflict zones. And we'll be discussing the operational and financial challenges relating to climate migration, as well as potential solutions. We have a colleague who'll be joining us on Zoom. Send her your best wishes because she broke her leg, and so is not mobile today, but she'll be joining us on Zoom. Julia, can you hear us? We will work on that. So Julia is currently is a former climate migration expert with IRAP, and will be speaking about challenges at the U.S. border, in particular talking about the narratives of the individuals who cross the border for a number of reasons, and thinking about different pathways to legal pathways into the U.S. that could provide for a safe and orderly migration. And then lastly, we will have two of my dear colleagues, Michael Globner, Center of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice, also faculty at the Environment School. Michael is a founding social entrepreneur with over 30 years in the climate space. You've worked with NGOs, with business at policy level and in funding. His background is vast, and you'll be helping us think about, in particular, the project that we're working on at Yale, which is funded by the Planetary Solutions Project, thinking about narratives and reframing the challenge around climate migration. And lastly, Sina Wolde, our fabulous postdoc. I want to do a special shout out. There's always one person who is the glue for a project and the heart of a project, and that is Sina. And Sina will be discussing our casework in 3 countries, and we have several of our students here who can discuss that as well. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you for coming, and perhaps we can start with the PowerPoint, the very first PowerPoint. Thank you. And I will just lay out the challenge a little bit. We invite your questions, your criticisms, and hopefully your collaboration in the future. We'll do very brief presentations, 5 to 7 minutes. We'll take a question afterwards, and then try to go into a lively conversation. Does that make sense? All right, thank you. All right, I would actually like to begin, if I can move the slide, with a reflection question for all of you in the audience. How many of you are who are here in New York City, for those of us who might be watching on video later, how many of you were born and raised in New York? Oh, more than I expected, thank you very much. How many of you were born in another country that is different from where your parents might have been born and raised? And more? And how many of you traveled for work or school or employment or family? All right, congratulations. You are all migrants, or at least have a migration journey. And I wanted to say this because one of the challenges of this topic is that we treat migration and human movement as an exception, as an extraordinary journey, when in fact, as IOM tells us and counts for us, about 2% of the world's population is on the move all the time. Sometimes for reasons that we consider laudable, employment, education, experiences that you have had, and sometimes for reasons that we find tragic and understandable, fleeing conflict, disaster, and for other reasons that sometimes we see as less compelling, like trying to make a better life for yourself and your family. And I think that background is important. Because if any of you have been following the speeches at the highest levels that have been made this week, migration is politicized, tragic, and intractable. And yet we treat it as somehow an extraordinary event that we cannot plan for, and somewhat as a nuisance. And we'd like to change our thinking about that by recognizing that we have always been a migratory species. And perhaps now the scale of what climate events will cause is bigger than we have become used to, but it is not unpredictable, and it does not mean that we do not have the power to both shape the experience, to shape safer passageways, and also, and I think this is important, help support receiving communities in adapting to flows of people when we know that often that meets tremendous resistance. I often begin by saying that 10 years ago, when I began to work around climate migration issues and as an extension of doing work with so-called convention refugees, climate migration was kind of a sleepy area of this topic. But in the last 10 years, 5 years, and particularly in the last few election cycles, both domestically and elsewhere, you'll note that climate migration is all in the news. It is a topic that people are concerned about, have experienced, if only because there is almost no community in any country that has not experienced, in particular, internal migration, which is migration within countries, due to any number of factors. So let's just talk a little bit about what we mean by climate migrant. It's a term that we prefer to use on this project rather than climate refugee, although that is the headline that you'll see more often. We do rely on IOM's definition, which is to think about climate migrants as a subset of environmental migrants who leave their habitual homes either for sudden or due to sudden or gradual alterations in the natural environment related to one of three impacts of climate change, particularly sea level rise, extreme weather events, and drought and water scarcity. So I will simply suffice to say this is a contested definition at times. There is a long, complicated history in the legal as well as the sociological literature as to what it means to be migrant. We can talk about that and how you think about it. But just for a base of reference for those of you who are new to this topic, that is who we're speaking about. And just to be clear, when we talk about people having to move because of both slow and fast or acute onset weather events, we're talking about people having to move because of heat and desertification, as we've seen large flows, particularly into Europe from parts of Africa, but elsewhere throughout the world, as people have to flee failing crops and livelihoods that are no longer sustainable. And increasingly, we'll see temperatures that will make life in regions of the world simply inhabitable or at the threshold of what human comfort and will be. And of course, we often talk about Africa, but it's worth noting that even in this hemisphere, in this half of the world, we're seeing the same processes which are driving migrant flows up across the southern border, and Julia will speak a little bit about that. But it's not just heat, but as you are aware, rising waters. It can be rising sea levels, which will be catastrophic for small island states around the world, but also waters in other ways, catastrophic weather events in the forms of cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, and of course floods. And there's no region of the world that will not be impacted by this. I think one of the most frightening lines, and I think it was in the 2018 IPCC report, was these extreme weather events will not just be single events across countries, but simultaneous crises. And for those of us who live in the United States, we've already seen that in the last few years. Wildfires on one coast, catastrophic hurricanes on the others. And sometimes in a country perhaps as large as the United States, we sometimes we underestimate the impact and the cost it has on infrastructure. But imagine, of course, almost any other country that's smaller geographically with fewer resources, where a single event could overwhelm the resources, financial, infrastructure, and even compassion, resources that we have for individuals who are being displaced. I want to sort of note, and this will come up in our conversation, that when individuals flee weather events or catastrophic events, people are fundamentally usually not crossing borders first. That is rarely the move of first choice. Rather, people often make small steps. Perhaps it's further inland. Perhaps it's to the next city or village. Frequently, it's to the nearest town. And families, and we'll speak about this over the course of the session, will often move in stages, right? We will send a family member to look for jobs, be able to send remittances. And it's impossible to speak about migration and climate displacement without also speaking as urbanization as a first measure. And you'll see around the world that those irregular sort of habitations are frequently individuals who are fleeing places where their livelihoods are no longer sustainable, hoping for better opportunities. But as you can imagine, the conditions in those irregular habitations are not conducive to health, wellness, stability, or I think social stability as well. I think for those of you who are new to this, I just wanted to note the groundswell report issued by the World Bank in about 2018, which I think had some of the most reliable projections about internal displacement. But I'll note that even 6 years on, even those numbers have already been surpassed in terms of the expected numbers of people who are moving inland within regions. When we speak about I apologize, I realize that with the lights, it's hard to see that. Suffice it to say that the projections for both internal and external displacement have far exceeded the projections that we might have expected even a few years ago. And many of the catastrophic events that have been visualized, we've seen these numbers being exceeded in single weather events leading to displacement. You will often hear numbers ranging from 50 million to 1 billion people, and I think we can talk about whether those are even conservative estimates going into the future. One of the reasons why it is so challenging to think about projections and numbers, which is of course what we all like to use, right? Metrics are comforting, is that migration choices are multifaceted and complex. When do you leave? Who leaves first? Who gets to stay? And I think if you have a chance to look at the Foresight report, now over a decade old, but it's very useful, you'll see the range of complex push and pull factors that will not only propel people to leave, but also contribute to people's wanting to stay. And I think that can be an underrepresented part of the conversation, which is the fact that migration is never an easy choice. People mostly want to stay in the areas where they're familiar, where they have language, cultural, and family ties. And so part of the conversation needs to be, what can we do to facilitate people staying where they want to stay, at least for as long as possible? If only because, as a physician, what particularly concerns me is the experience of those so-called trapped populations, individuals who cannot leave because of age, because of vulnerabilities, because of illness. And what I fear we will see is, in fact, trapped populations that consist of two different generations. Perhaps the oldest individuals who may be too frail to be able to move, but are also unable to engage in sustainable livelihoods, and children who also may be too young to be able to travel and make an arduous journey. And so I also fear that we'll have a generation of lost children who are staying in degrading environments, and we have to think about their health and wellness too. Raina, hopefully you'll be able to touch on the many international efforts and attempts to begin to think about legal instruments that will address this. I think suffice it to say, there is no so-called climate migration convention. There are a number of soft legal instruments that address this. It's not that there are not protections in international law, but what is sufficient and how do we change legal obligations in a constantly evolving environmental context is something to consider. The other point that we would like to emphasize is that there's still a tendency for us to talk about climate migration as happening in the future, something that's happening elsewhere. But for those of you who are in the US, climate migration is already happening. It is happening now. There have already been planned relocations in Alaska, in Louisiana, of communities, particularly on coastal regions. Does anyone recognize where this photo is taken from? Everyone is feeling, oh, we have a brave hand. So this does look like Louisiana, you're right, it's an American town, but this is actually Alaska. This is, and so you've correctly identified, those are the two communities that have begun, and yet how often do we hear about them, and how often is that part of the dialogue? Part of the purpose of this panel is to elevate the awareness of the topic and the issue. I'll note that some countries who foresee a foreshortened future are already trying to take steps to try to capture the loss of their cultural heritage and history. Tuvalu has become one of the first countries in the world to try to create an entirely online digital representation. And it's like, as a psychiatrist, I think there are questions that we don't talk enough about the loss of that important cultural heritage. What does it mean to be from a place that no longer exists, that you can never return to? I would love to have that conversation with you, perhaps offline or after this. I won't belabor my own personal research separate from this project, but I will happy to answer questions about what does it take to build a reactive system, a move from a reactive system to one in which we're actually thinking about preemptively about challenges. I'm particularly interested in the health and mental health impacts about what climate displacement does, but it also has impacts for people who are not climate displaced. Many of the pharmaceutical supplies that you count on, saline, medicines, are going to be greatly impacted when large swaths of the country may be underwater. So how many of you remember that the hurricane in Asheville resulted in a shortage of saline and medical supplies around the country? Again, it's not just the climate migration that's a piece of it, but the impacts on the infrastructure for those who are leaving and those of us who are apparently not immediately affected. I'll come back to the slide later. I would like to move on to other panelists, but I'll just note that at the very least, we've seen the impact of prolonged heat events, not only the challenges on the physical body, right? The human body has upper limits on the heat that it can tolerate, but also the impact on mental health, both of trapped populations and individuals who have to engage in displacement journeys. We talk about PTSD, but trauma is really just the beginning of it. What does it mean to also experience the anxiety and depression of instability and to have a sense of a lack of permanent dislocation and lack of belonging? So we'll incorporate that into the conversation and just invite you into the beginnings of this dialogue. Rania, I'm going to pass on the questions, so I want to have you enter your thoughts into this dialogue. Thank you for joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you so much. It's very hard to speak after such a comprehensive presentation, so thank you for the presentation, for the numbers and drawing the picture. But please, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, the traffic was horrible, so I was a bit late, but it's always very, very inspiring and positive for me to be in New York and also attending such an important moment. And I'm more proud now that we are here, and we have a number, I see, also of students, and we're talking about climate migration. So it's something that make me feel so happy, because it's something that's not going to end. It's something started years ago and will continue. And before I go into the technical discussion, I want to tell you a story. And it's a real story, by the way. In 2022, I was working in Syria, and I met Miss Amina. Miss Amina is a grandmother for 3 children. Her daughter and the husband of her daughter migrated somewhere because of the conflict there. And she were trying to return back to her village in Aleppo. Of course, as most of you know, this is a country that has been struggling with conflict for a number of years. They suffered with an earthquake, and she's struggling also with water scarcity. And I remember very well that at that time, some of the other agencies were distributing bottles of water, food packs, etc. And Miss Amina, and I'm Egyptian citizen myself, she told me, you know what, we don't want this. We just want water. I will plant my land, I will feed my grandchildren, I don't want anything else. Miss Amina and her grandchildren has been displaced several times because of the several situation I talked about, whether the conflict, earthquake, economic situation, and now she has to move again because of the water scarcity, because she cannot survive with her grandchildren. And this story is more important than the numbers, because we always look into the numbers, but we don't go beyond the numbers to the human side of the story. The grandchildren that they cannot survive, the grandmother that she's trying to feed them and educate them and protect them in an environment severely affected by multiple crises, emphasizing that climate change, environmental degradation is intensified multiple crisis, is part of an intensified multiple crisis, and it doesn't come alone. It comes with other aspects. And in the presentation, there was social aspect, environmental aspect, economic, health, etc. So it is a holistic, a severe implication on people, on their mental health, on their health, into their education and protection, etc. And this was very, very important for me, because 1 year after another, it get confirmed by figures that people are moving for several reasons, because they cannot survive in such environment. And climate change is real, it's happening every day. I work in Switzerland myself. Switzerland this year in summer was 37 degrees. And it's a huge thing. There are cities completely vanished. So it's basically what we need to say, it is a reality. We don't, while of course data, foresights and data points, and it's also emphasizing on that, but the human story is important. I also liked so much the presentation that was saying people doesn't want to leave. Yes, people doesn't want to leave their history, their families, their rent, their house, their communities. They don't want to leave. Some of us has the choice, like I left my country to go and study and work, but some of us doesn't have the choice. They are obliged to leave. And this brings me to IOM, the organization I work in. And IOM specifically is focusing on climate change, environmental degradation from a migration lens. We're not doing any other organization work. We are working on how we can support the affected population on the ground with solution for people to stay, solution for people who are already on the move, who've been displaced or migrated, and people who have to move, because we know also there is some people who have to move because basically their countries is going to disappear. And I think also this has been presented in the presentation. And to do so, and I was a challenge when I joined IOM some years ago, because they told me we want to have a strategy on how to implement that. And one of the key aspects I found, and was a gap, that in all the frameworks, except the Global Compact for Migration, which has a specific objective on climate migration and movement of people during to climate change, environmental degradation. But most of the frameworks was not recognizing the migrants into their cover decision, into their policy work streams, etc. So we started from COP27 into ensuring that migration and migrants and displaced people are part of the target groups. Of course, we all call for local communities engagement, for women, for children, for elderly people, for young people. But also spelling out migrants and displaced community was extremely important for the policymakers to recognize that they are part of the community. They are part of the affected people. They should be part of the national adaptation plans, national determination commitments, systems within different governments, but also accessing climate finance should not be forgotten. So we've been working very, very closely with UNFCCC during different COPs, and we're very happy that even UNSG this year, COP30 messages came spelling specifically migrants and displaced communities. But different work stream like loss and damage, IOM was the only agency, part of 30 organizations from the UN, helping the Board of Loss and Damage to operationalize the fund, focusing on the most vulnerable country, but also focusing on including migrants and displaced community. We have been working on the global goal for adaptation, on climate finance access. So at the policy level, it was extremely important at the top, because if it's not recognized here, still policies are a top-bottom approach. It will not influence the country national planning and system strengthening. But also we have 190 offices across the world, and we are operational. So we started to work with government to build their capacity to integrate migrants and displaced people into their national planning, disaster risk reduction planning, early warning planning, because there is a way to support people to stay if we mitigate and adapt and have programs that get fit for purpose. So this was one aspect, but we felt that this is not enough. We started to work on regional frameworks. We worked for Africa on Kampala Declaration, which is a continental declaration signed by most of the African countries, basically focusing on climate change and human mobility, where we technically lead and we technically support. But also we worked with the Pacific Island Framework. We help them because we know that people has to move. And we know that if they need to move, they need to use legal pathways, and it needs to be strategized and accepted by different countries across them. But this was not enough, because now it's policy how Miss Amina and her grandchildren will be benefit from that. So we started to look, advocating and having all your voices, I hope, after this session will be with us to ensure the inclusion and the support and the solution for people who will be affected by climate change and are affected by multiple other crises, are integrated and part of the discussion. We started to work on establish the Climate Mobility Innovation Lab, where we use science and academia, we use your brains on bringing innovative solutions for people to stay. How Miss Amina can plant her land still in a water scarcity environment? How can they survive in an extreme heat? How can we help them using the science, using the technology, using the academia to help us? Because as a humanitarian sector, we don't have this. We know we need the science, we need the technology, we need the academia to come hand in hand with us in a partnership to be able to find these solutions. But also one of the important aspects, the World Bank report, you referred to the one on 2018, I refer to the one on 2021, was clear that climate change will be the main cause of disrupting peace. Because of course, if I am a mother, I cannot feed my son, and there is a limited amount of food, we'll keep fighting for who will feed their son. We are human beings at the end of the day. So it's very, very important that we hear local communities, we contextualize solution for people based on their culture and context, and we find for them solution to survive, to support their resilience, adaptation, and livelihood. And that's why we started to build a program where we integrate peace-building discussions, ensuring that migrants, displaced communities, their social cohesion, their acceptance, and the understanding. Sometimes we think that we know everything, but raising the awareness is extremely important. In a region like Africa, for example, 60% of the population are young people. They have amazing ideas. They have great entrepreneur ideas for climate innovation. They have a great idea to raise the awareness and the capacity of their parents and communities and engage them. But also we felt that they are great voice. Not only that, in Asia, in the Pacific, in the Americans here, in Europe, and this should continue. Because if you think that everyone knows, no, they don't know. And figures is not enough. We need to continue, keep telling the story. And this is what we are trying to do in IOM. So we work on a policy level. We use the regional and the global frameworks to influence policies, legal aspects. And I'm so happy that you say climate migration, because refugees is actually minimizing it. But migration is the border. Most of the people, I think that according to the latest report in 2024, almost 80 million people have been displaced during two climate change, disaster, environmental degradation in 2024. Not all of them left their houses and never came back. Some of them, they came back, but some of them, they had no place to go to. And some of the governments could not afford having solution. In Kenya, for example, when the flood happened, they told us that 400 million that was going to go to support the expansion and basically support the sustainable development in the country has gone to build shelters for the people, to feed them, to support them. And this is, of course, a big responsibility for the country. But it's actually climate change bringing people backward rather than forward. And this is our role as academia, as science, as UN, as international organization, as government, as private sector, using the AI and these technologies to support them, bring the global knowledge to the arm of the people, to adapt, to be resilient, to find solutions to stay, to find solution if they have to move through legal pathway within the accepted legal environment, but also keep the voice of Miss Amina and her grandchildren. Keep telling the story that we are talking about people. We're not talking about events. We're talking about history and communities, and we're talking about girls' education, boys' futures, and we will seek all of you support, not only here, but everywhere else. I'll stop and be happy to answer questions after.
Oh my goodness, that was, thank you for putting a human face and a beautiful human face, but also elevating other issues that are increasingly a part of this, right? It's a securitization challenge, migration is a threat multiplier, the voice of a lost generation of children. Thank you. I'm sort of wondering, should we go to yours now and then have Julia? Julia, all right, we'll do Julia and we'll get another set of voices. Julia, are you on screen? Can you see us or hear us? There we are. We see one of you. Matt is one of our students. Julia, can you? All right.
Well,
Hello. That's Mads, yes? So,
should I do my slides or
yay.
are you going to do it on your end?
Julia, the whole room sends good wishes for your health and recovery too. Thank you for joining us. Certain irony around your lack of mobility today in a smaller scale, but please take it away.
Sure. Yeah. I'm sorry I can't be there with you all, and thank you for the really fantastic first two presentations. Are you going to put my slides up on your end, or should I share my screen?
We do have your slide. All right, share. Why don't we share?
Okay. The host isn't allowing sharing for this meeting.
All right, let's see if we can solve this technical issue. Do you think you can start? And
Yeah, I could also do it. I could do it without slides if needed.
Well, we see if we can pull up your PowerPoint, which is in the box, I think.
So I'm going to talk about some research that I did with the International Refugee Assistance Project over the past 2 years, and it's a topic that I began looking into with my own research through my organization, Human Security Initiative, on the impact of climate change on other drivers of displacement and how climate impacts can intersect with and exacerbate violence and other forms of persecution that drive people to seek protection across borders. So this the main study that I'm focusing on here is a 2-year study using surveys implemented by service providers at the U.S.-Mexico border. So working with partners on the ground, we worked questions about climate impacts in folks' countries of origin and in their migration journeys into questionnaires that were integrated in screening and intake procedures for people seeking U.S. protection. And the questions were based on some work I did on the ground in Tijuana with my own organization for the IRAP project, where we asked these questions to people in shelters who are seeking U.S. asylum, whether they experience climate-related disasters in their home countries and what those looked like. And we were really interested to find that, or surprised to find, I guess, that when we would ask people why they fled their home country, almost never did they mention anything about climate. But then when we started asking questions about whether there were climate disasters in their home countries, we were able to, in most cases, given a relatively small sample at that point, establish a relationship between the climate disaster and the reason the person did identify for leaving. For example, and that was just with folks from Central America and Mexico, who mostly said that they left because of targeted violence by organized criminal groups. So, that was, the impetus for them to leave. But through our research, we found, through asking these targeted questions, we found that in many cases, disasters were a precursor to those organized criminal groups gaining power and influence in these regions. They would move in after a hurricane, destroys infrastructure. The government doesn't do enough for the people who are there. So then the armed group comes in and takes over. People's crops are no longer able to grow, so they're more vulnerable. They, allowing the gang to recruit new members. So these are stories we heard a lot, and then decided to do kind of a more systemic study with the surveys. But one limitation of the survey model is that we can't ask follow-up questions. So we did with International Refugee Assistance Project, or IRAP. We did supplement the initial report that we put out on the survey data with a report with on-ground interviews that we conducted in Ciudad Juarez at the border, where we were able to ask people follow-up questions and get more comprehensive answers, establishing, and in many cases, establishing a direct causal relationship between climate-related disasters and people's stated reasons for fleeing. So again, this is two different but related studies I'm going to go through here. The first is the survey project, which our report based on that project is called Enduring Change, We conducted that with 8 other partner organizations, and collected data from over 6,000 people, mostly seeking asylum, but seeking other forms of immigration relief in the United States as well. And we also the survey is mostly multiple choice questions. With based on common answers that we heard on the ground when we asked these types of questions. So, did you experience a climate related disaster? How did that disaster impact you and your family? And then there were also open text response boxes enabling people to put more detail, put quotes, and we tried really hard to in our report include as many of those quotes as we could. And then again, the second we supplemented this work with a with another study on the ground at where we got that centered around 3 main narratives that was based on our interviews in person in shelters. The first report, and I'm sorry, and that report is called Danger by Design. So the first report that we put out about a year ago, and also just for context, I should share that due to funding cuts to IRAP, our this project and our whole climate team was laid off. So I'm no longer with IRAP, and this project, came to a premature end. We were supposed to put out a second report uh, for Climate Week, but that didn't happen. So I'm talking through the results of the first report, which is on the first 3,000 responses. When I was doing and analyzing the data for the second report, the findings were largely consistent. So this is going to reflect the scope of the whole project. So just because of who our partner organizations were, most of our responses came from organizations working at the U.S.-Mexico border. Most of the people that we spoke that completed the survey were from Latin America, and and about 44% of them are children, because Kids in Need of Defense was one of our main partners. So I just wanted to give that caveat that the findings aren't reflective of people seeking U.S. protection as a whole, certainly not reflective of people seeking U.S. protection at the border, but just based on who our partners were and the populations that they served. So 43% reported experiencing a climate-related disaster in their country of origin. And again, these are people seeking protection for all kinds of reasons, with the most common being heavy rains, extreme heat, hurricanes, and flooding. And we also asked questions about disasters in transit, which I'll get to those findings if I have time. But yeah, if you guys could just give me some kind of signal if I'm running out of time, let me know, because I forgot to look at it.
We've got just a couple minutes, Julia, and I apologize.
Okay, all right,
For
I'll
your
move
patience with the
quickly.
technical piece. There is a slight delay in the sound. So if you want me to move the PowerPoint, say it out loud and I will happily move the slide for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you were able to put the slides up because I can't see them from where I am. So I didn't know that they were up. I am on the key findings slide. But you could just go through and show what the reports look like. So yeah, I'm on the key findings slide, and now I'm gonna move. Thank you. Okay, now I see it. And now I'm gonna move to the next slide, which is a couple of quotes from those open text response boxes. Our report, the Enduring Change report, has an appendix with like 50 case examples and quotes that I urge you to look at. But for this presentation, I just pulled a few to share. So a 38-year-old man from Mexico said the heat has exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. We don't have potable water, and our family's corn crop is dried up completely. 51-year-old Cuban woman said, we were without a roof, which means without a home. We had no electricity, no food, and faced a lot of heat. Currently, there are people who have not recovered. There are no medicines in the hospitals, and more. So now I'm moving to the slide that says effect of disaster in country of origin. I think this was some of the most, you're going to have to rewind slides. Yep, here. So this is what I think were some of the most interesting insights that came out of this study, is how these disasters affected people in their home countries. So 57% said their homes were damaged or destroyed. I won't go through all this, but just the top lines, 27% said gangs or other armed group collected extortion fees. 29% experienced income reduction or inability to make a living. 40% lacked access to sufficient food and water. 27% experienced extreme poverty. Which I think, and another big takeaway, based on what we learned is that it's really hard, if not impossible in many cases, to describe somebody as climate displaced because these climate exacerbates and interacts with all of these other factors that drive movement. The next slide, I think, has a good, has a story. Thank you for the time check. Has a story that I think illustrates this interaction quite well. This was a surveyed respondent named Juan, who I was actually able to follow up with on the phone. So Juan fled El Salvador. The reason he said he left was because the gang threatened his life. They tried to recruit him and he resisted, so they said they were going to kill him. He had also said in his survey that there were hurricanes where he lived. So I asked him to tell me a little bit about that, and he said that the hurricanes, that he was a fisherman supporting his family that way, as were many people in the community. Floods destroyed his home. The government issued a red alert prohibiting fishing boats, and then didn't provide any aid to the family. He says we couldn't work for more than a month. The gang came in and did provide resources, and then were able to use that as an opportunity to expand their influence. They tried to recruit Juan, and he had to leave. But if I I'd met him at the border before I was doing climate research and asked why he left, he wouldn't have mentioned anything about the hurricane. So it was really interesting to uncover stories like this.
Julia, do you think you can take us to some final takeaways from the project?
Yes. So I think the main takeaway is that many of the folks who are arriving to seek U.S. protection, or this is likely generalizable globally, are like may fit definitions of climate displaced people, even if they don't acknowledge or identify climate factors as influencing their decisions to leave directly. And I guess just to bring it back to here and now, we are experiencing a human rights crisis here in the United States. We're seeing the administration is targeting people who entered the United States through a parole program under the Biden administration within the past 2 years. So here, where I live in San Francisco, ICE is showing up to asylum hearings and dismissing cases and putting people in detention, processing them for deportation. These are the people I spoke with who this is happening to. They're being put in horrendous conditions in ICE detention. They're being deported to places where they face climate-related and other urgent danger. And that is where I'm shifting. All of my advocacy right now is to defending the human rights of people who are suffering, experiencing torture and deprivation of their liberty, being torn out of their communities right here in the United States. And I urge all of you to do anything in your power to support those people, and the right to move freely across borders, and the right to thrive and survive here in the United States. So thank you so much for having me.
Julia. Julia, thank you for putting human rights and the protection of human rights into the conversation, and you will not have been able to see it, but there are many heads nodding emphatically in this room while you were wrapping up, so thank you. I think just because we had to start late and I want to make sure that everyone gets to present, let's have our final two speakers speak about the planetary solutions work and our ambitions, as well as our partners, and then we will go into a discussion. So please hold your questions. Thank you for being patient with the technical issues.
Hi, I'm Michael Golub. I'm the director of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice. So everybody this is actually this panel, we had one last year as well. Everybody you've heard from is a partner in this project we do out of the center called Framing Climate Migration. We have in a 5-year, signed a 5-year MOU with International Organization of Migration to work in Angola, which you'll hear about our work there, and in Mexico. And we also have work we're doing in New Haven and New England as well. And Julia, when she was at IRAP, was central to our establishing relationships with organizations in Mexico as well. Our motivation really comes from this image here. As we work on, we have one of our 4 programs is climate justice, and we often think about. We can go to the next slide. We often think about deep ocean currents and cycles as being really disastrous. There's a human cycle that's actually happening related to what Julia was talking about, which is today, for example, twice as many people are displaced by climate migration as by war. And when that's happening, for example, if you look at academic studies of voting patterns in Europe, you have 2 major voting blocks. You have a climate voting bloc and an anti-immigrant voting bloc. Unfortunately, we do not have a climate voting bloc in the United States of America. We do have an anti-immigrant voting bloc, as you can imagine. When anti-immigrant voting blocs vote, they vote the policies that those votes lead to are often anti-climate action policies, which then aggravates climate migration, which is a major pump. So we're in a very bad negative feedback loop represented by this chart. So the only good news here is that most elected officials and most publics do not identify what the word climate migration is, which means it's an issue that we can still try to shape and define. And we've been welcomed, blessedly, by groups on the ground like IOM, IRAP, and others that we work with, including grassroots organizations in places as far away as Angola, because they're busy solving these really horrific frontline situations and understand that they're operating in a meta environment that's potentially quite difficult. So the project overall, and you'll hear from Sina, who leads our project and is a postdoc, Sina here is one of the leading experts on sub-Saharan African migration generally in the world, and she's been working not just in climate adaptation, but also in migration for the last few years. So she'll talk about the work that she's done and our students have done in Angola with refugees from the Mexican border, and in New Haven, New England. And our project is called Framing Climate Migration, and the idea really is to try to figure out how to create positive on-ramps and positive views of migration before it really sinks in as a wildly, unfortunately, potentially negative issue. And a lot of that work is along the lines of what Rania was talking about, which is bringing frontline voices. And Sina will talk about some of the work we did this summer to do that. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples of what framing means, and it's a very long process. Luckily, we're blessed with partnership with Tony Lyserowitz and one of the leading communication centers on climate in the world, but it's a long ball play to figure out how to frame things. Frames that you all are familiar with are things like pro-life, pro-choice, things like that. Again, the only good news here is if you polled most politicians and most elected officials in most places of the world, they wouldn't put the words climate and migration together yet. And what we want to do is when they do, not have it be not have it accelerate this pump, but rather decelerate this pump and try to create positive solutions. 2 quick examples of what framing means. Our students in New England and New Haven started noticing that the stories in our area, at least, there was a lot of positive stories in New Haven. Migrants from Hurricane Maria. The largest Shuar community, an Ecuadorian Amazonian group outside of the Amazon, is in New Haven. And they bring a lot of culture and music and food to the region that's new, including, there's been long-standing Puerto Rican settlements in Connecticut, but the acceleration and the growth of that culture and the particular places in Puerto Rico that folks came from have been a real contribution. So we're thinking about trying to model a climate migration festival in New England sometime this spring and create it as a template. So imagine the first thing that people around the world hear about is there's a climate migration festival. It changes the narrative. It gets people thinking differently. Another one is the Kigali Compact that IOM was so central to. Sub-Saharan Africa has a humane, civilized treaty around climate migration that we saw in action in southern Angola, and the rest of the world needs to learn from that. So taking up the ways in which people have been able to create positive approaches to this is really critical to try to deflate what's a lot of very ugly feelings around migration that then leads to bad climate action and, again, a bad pump. And the numbers we're talking about are really enormous. So we have to get in there and start trying to change that cycle. So with that, I want to pass it to our program leader, Sina Walde, who's an amazing scholar and leader in this field, who's been leading our students in the work for the last few months.
Thank you, Michael. I'll briefly discuss our ongoing 3 case studies. The first one is the Angola case study. We are working with the IOM Regional Office East, Horn of Africa, and Southern Africa, and also IOM Angola. And we also have a local partner development workshop where we have been working on migration in Angola for the last 20 years. So our students, our team traveled from the US through Europe to Angola, and we met with the ministries and government officials in Luanda. Then we moved to the southern part of the country, to Lubango, and we drove all the way to a province called Kunene. That's where we did our case study. The Angola case study is mainly focused on investigating the influence of climate change on internal and cross-border movement of people by capturing the lived experience and mobility pattern of the people from the Kunene province. And we are assessing the impact of environmental change on their livelihood, labor pattern, cultural narrative, food security, focusing on the local perception of climate change and migration, their coping strategies, and also economic dynamics. And then we have the second case study, which is focused on the US-Mexico, technically US-Mexico southern border of the US. This case study is focused on understanding the impact of climate change on the migration transition routes when people travel from southern, central, and the Caribbean into the US through the south border, and highlighting not only the struggles they go through, but also how they adapt, how they integrate and contribute to the host communities once they are in the US. And as Michael said also, the output of this one, it feeds into our Climate Migration Day Festival design. And the third case study is focused on Connecticut and New England region. We are working with Sanctuary Kitchen, Junta for Progressive Action, and Metro to Connecticut. And this case study, as Michael mentioned earlier, is focused on more highlighting the contribution of migrants through art, culture, food, entrepreneurship. And also these stories and this narrative, the lived experience of people who are currently in this region, we are hoping these narratives will help bolster the defense of sanctuary cities like the New Haven and other cities, and also to shape our Climate Migration Day Festival, where we are hoping the first time some people hear the word climate migration would be when we talk about the festival, so they will have that positive thought about it. I will dive a little deeper into our Angola fieldwork. So as I said, we were very warmly welcomed by the government, by IOM Angola and other local, two local universities. So we had 2 focus group discussions and in 2 different villages, and then 5 in other 5 village household interviews with different families. So each village had different problems. But overall, the community also was very actively engaged in our conversation. As you can see, that was like when we were doing focus group discussion, the bottom 2 images. We did like more interactive exercise where we asked the communities to come and show us which extreme event they have experienced. We posted some photos. And most of the events that highlighted was drought, deforestation, water scarcity, poor water quality, and floods. And so the people in Kunene province, their livelihood mainly agro-pastoralist, but the pastoralism is becoming more or less, and they are focused more on agriculture, and which they plant once or twice a year, depending on the rain. They are highly dependent on rainfall patterns. And these are some of the farms. When we went, there was no rain, so they already collected their food. And there are also some water access structures, like the blue one you see, constructed by some NGOs, which was supposed to provide clean water. But as you can see in the bucket, that's the type of water that comes out of also the water point. In some of the water points, some of them were not operating, and then others were working, and a little bit far. So when the water points were broken, people have to go to water pan where you see some animals and share water with animals. Otherwise, they have to travel 20 to 30 kilometers on foot to buy water from other villages or other towns, which is also quite costly. And on the other side, you see some of the food they produce drought resistance crops such as millet, sorghum, and sometimes maize also. And the other one you see in a small bowl is a dried plant, which they dry these plants. It's grown wildly, so they dry it and they cook food with it. So overall, access to water is very problematic in that province, and also access to high schools was really, it lacked it. There were only few schools, otherwise young people had to travel 2 hours to get to the schools. And okay, so before going back, so overall, what we found out is there is no migration of communities there, but there are members of the household go to Namibia, which was half an hour. We were doing this half an hour from the border. So they go to Namibia and other regions to look for a job to supplement the families during drought time. Drought has been really recurrent in the last 4 or 5 years. So all the crops they produce, they don't sell it anymore. They just store it because they don't know when the next rain is going to come. And the main reason they mentioned why their family members are moving to other cities and other countries is because of food insecurity. They actually used the word because of hunger. There is no food to eat, so someone has to go and get some money. So in addition to that, but these communities didn't just sit and wait for help, they were also doing their own adaptation technique to this change. So they collect these wild fruits, they grow wildly in the area, they dry them and then make alcoholic drinks through that distillation process, as you can see. And they sell these alcoholic drinks to supplement their income. As well as I said before, this is sort of traditional crop storage unit they made with hand, and inside they use mud to plaster it, and they store their crops here for over 6 months, even for a year, and that's what they use during when they don't have rain. And then the last one you see in a small bowl is it's also wildly grown, some sort of like a peanut family. They collect and also they mash, make like a porridge, and also they eat that. So overall, we asked them if there was, if the drought persisted, if they are thinking about moving, and that was a no. Most of the, especially the household leaders, they don't have the intention to move. They actually said, we will wait for God to help us and send us water or someone to help us. Otherwise, we will die here. We are not moving. But we will send our children so they get education and they have better jobs and better life. And the support they needed was mostly, what actually struck me the most was like they didn't complain about these things. They only asked, like, we just need farming equipment. We can do this ourselves. Like, they didn't complain about the drought. They didn't complain about the flood they were experiencing, but they just need some farming equipments and some water resources. Then we will survive. So, yeah, from seeing it from this side of the world, it felt like they needed more support, but they were asking was so little to adapt to this change and stay in the place where they call home. Yeah, so this is our preliminary finding. We're still processing the data. There is the National Climate Dialogue happening by the end of October in Angola, and we are invited to share our results there, and they're also planning to take some of our results to COP. And yeah, we are hoping with additional funding to expand our studies into the neighboring regions, yeah, because similar problems persist in the southern part of the country.
Overall, 3.5 million people, 10% of the Angolan population, under a extending El Nino cycle, functionally are at severe risk. And we've been really honored by IOM. The IOM has just entered the country and has asked us to do some of the first policy work that the country itself will be using. We're working, a lot of the ethnographic work is really meant to inform this framing work. And what we're doing, because of Sina's particular expertise in climate attribution, just to get baseline information. The government is not very polarized on this issue yet, and there are issues between Angola and Namibia that are still collaborative, and increasing understanding within the Angolan government can increase regional collaboration in ways that we think are useful. So with that, I'll...
Thank you.
Thank you. I realize that we've given you a wealth of ideas, from thinking about international financing to international to regional cooperation to the voices in particular regions to, and I think this is very important, local efforts to adapt even in the absence of concerted resources being brought into situations. So Rania is an expert in demand, and we'll have to leave us in a couple of minutes. So I think what I would like to do is start by inviting questions from the audience, particularly directed at IOM and Rania, so we can have your thoughts, questions, and then we'll come to our other case studies as well.
When migrants travel across the world due to cultural differences in the country that they may go to, they often experience marginalization or indifference or mistreatment. If we know that the climate migration crisis will be exacerbated within the next couple of years, how do international organizations like the IOM or how do national governments proactively navigate those cultural differences and make sure that in the next couple of years we won't see that intercultural strife?
Thank you so much for this question. I would like to say that as a start, what we try to do is that we are trying to make the communities adapt and bring solutions for people to stay. And this is part of our strategy. And that's why we create things like the Climate Mobility Innovation Lab. We work with the governments on system strengthening, including national adaptation plans, on disaster risk reduction plans, early warning, early action, etc., with the government, raising the awareness of the communities, etc. I think my colleague here mentioned something. People doesn't want to leave, because leaving means leaving behind your history, your family, your roots, etc. So no one wants to leave, but they want to survive and ensure the livelihood and the protection and the rights of their families and their children. So as a start, this is one thing we do. But migration in general, not only because of climate, is happening. And the risk of now currently most of the people are internally displaced, but with the severe situations that's happening as an intensified multiple crisis, people have to leave. So what IOM is doing two things. One thing is, which is very important, building in the different policies with the government, ensure migrants and displaced communities are well integrated in these policies, build the capacity of the government and the communities in that, but ensure social cohesion programs are part of the programs we're implementing on the ground. And the other thing is the legal pathways, which is very, very important, that if people have to move within illegal frameworks and illegal pathways, not just to leave without having any idea where they're going to or through any irregular migration aspects. So this is what we are calling for. This is what we're supporting. So we work with the communities on build their capacities and understanding and the awareness, ensure social cohesion programs and community resilience and support programs are well embedded into our programs, but also on a policy level with the government in ensuring that this is part of the system strengthening and government national planning.
Thank you. And I imagine that legal pathways are also contribute to the social cohesion programming when people feel like there is things are done in a regular way. Another question for Rania, if we have one.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as you mentioned, Dr. Prabhu, like the first step tends to be urbanization. And I imagine that in a lot of cases, those tend to be informal settlements, which increases the risks for physical and mental health. It increases the risk of sort of this intercultural strife. It increases the likelihood that people will not get the education that they need and all of these different intergenerational problems. But at the same time, it may offer an opportunity where people who are coming from all over the country are now centralizing, and there's an opportunity for community organizations or government organizations to come in and say, okay, this is the first phase, we recognize that, and now we want to build resilience and build prosperity in what could otherwise be pretty underserved communities. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what the specific community organizations and what specific governance strategies countries and cities can put in place such that this migration and urbanization is not a negative, but is instead a way to progress sort of in situ development.
Thank you so much for this question. We always say that migration is an adaptation strategy. It's part of the adaptation strategy and the resilience within different communities. But also, I don't want us to generalize because basically every country has its own context and culture. There are countries that can support different communities into their prosper, resilience, and there are other countries where people are already displaced because of conflict or economic situation, and the government cannot afford basically to settle them in ensuring their rights, integrity, protection, and livelihood. So this is one aspect that when we want to categorize people, we need to ensure that we contextualize things that respect the culture and the context of every country. I always say when it comes to climate change, no one solution fit for all. And that's why when we create a Climate Mobility Innovation Lab, we put it 4 in the regions, 1 in Africa, 1 in Asia, 1 in Pacific, because there is the culture, the beliefs, the systems, and the people capacities. So this is one important aspect. The other thing is, which you refer to on the governments and migration as adaptation strategy. Yes, at some point, and we talked about the Pacific Islands, and there was a Pacific Island framework. There was Australia Tuvalu agreement that people has to move as an adaptation strategy as part of the resilience, but through a legal framework. And I think that this is one of the very good examples. But when you talked about urbanization, people move to urban cities and urbanization, but the resources is depleting in these areas. So it's not also the solution. I think the solution is that we need to look into this situation across the nexus. When the crisis happen and how people need to survive, where a bottle of water, maybe a bag of food, a shelter can work, but on the transition, recovery, and the long term, how we can, all of us, not only the government, but all the partners, all the international organizations, all the local communities, how can we support them to transition, recover, and sustain? Because a bottle of water, a bag of food is not sustainable. But building a project like the one we talked about, where we work on the policy, government strengthening, but also the awareness of the communities, build their capacities, and then bring a sustainable solution, some machines and some crops and some water resources where they can survive and strive and be able to support their families. This is the way to go. Because, and I think that I don't like to look into climate change responses from an emergency response. I think that this is emergency response. It needs to be looked at from a sustainable development. How it could be that because it's happening every day, and when it comes to climate, everyone is vulnerable. The vulnerability across different countries. One country or one government can afford support people more than another, but everyone is vulnerable to that. So we need to look at it from staying away from the emergency response, which should continue, but how can we turn that around to be transition, recovery, resilience, and sustainable development within these communities? Thank you.
I have a question, and it was going to be for all of you, but thank you very much. Sorry you have to leave and not be part of the continuing discussions. Thank you.
But it sounded like there was a beginning of a question.
I have a question. Yes, I have a question, and I just feel like this needs to be said, and I guess that it's obvious to everyone here. that this is such a fraught moment in history that we're living through right now, with the rise of authoritarianism and tribalism and xenophobia and demonization of the other. And then in this country, we've got a certain president who thinks that climate change is a hoax and a con job. And so this combination of climate denialism with authoritarianist tendencies is just a very difficult moment for this particular discussion to be taking place within. And so I was listening to the panelists and thinking about a couple of questions. One has to do with, is there a way to build the case, even within this type of an administration, for taking responsibility for making things better in people's countries of origin, for actually reversing policy that has destroyed USAID and destroyed resources, to change that in order to support their fear of the other, to help migrants stay in where they are, where they want to be, in better situations. Is there any way to deal with that weird, strange conflict that we're facing? And then I also, on the framing, climate framing question, am reminded of what happened with the Green New Deal and how everyone was for it until someone attached AOC's name to it, and then a certain side of the aisle decided they were all against it suddenly. So I'm not sure if a festival is enough.
Well, that's what universities are for, right? We're here. That's what we took this project on because it's not casual. This is I think as more serious than deep ocean pumps reversing. If you're going to move 1 billion people between now and 2050, which is what some of the estimates are, this is no joke. And we don't have an answer yet. But that's why we do research. That's why we think about these kinds of these frameworks. Framing is not a fast thing. I see many people around the room who've led social movements. It's not fast. And we can provide the research and the data and the field work to try to help power new ways of thinking about this. And we're blessed with amazing partners on the ground who see that need also. It's a great privilege to have people who are in the field feeding starving people, saying, please think at this higher level with us. And so that's what this project is about. So you're right, it's not easy, and I don't have immediate answers. I gave those as examples of kind of breakout ways of doing things that may or may not work, and we'll see over the next couple of years. So other questions? Thanks for the question.
I'm concerned, as an educator of 31 years, that essentially what was formerly known as the First World does not have to open their borders. Close the borders. It's now the formerly known as Third World problems, and we just allow it to occur. It seems like that's where our government's headed. So my question to you is, how do we pierce the thinking of our present politicians? That's really the question. It really doesn't matter whether there's migration here and there if America and other first world nations won't allow people in.
Michael?
I'm a teacher in New York City. I took today off. Yeah, Yale.
Yay.
I don't have an answer because I don't think it's a single answer. But a couple of things, since we are based in New York City, which has had to think deeply about to integrate large numbers of people. I think that we are failing the problem by not thinking about these issues of what it means to include, what it means to have adequate resources, and what does it mean for receiving communities to feel part of the discussion and not have discussion solutions or problems merely imposed upon them. Because I think that is what has contributed to resistance, frustration, and a rise in political voices that may have been quiet, I wouldn't say dormant, but quieter 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that rather than deny that this evoke strong feelings and label people with strong feelings as xenophobic only. I think it would be useful for us to try to understand the pieces and sources of that strain, and to understand that when we're in moments of austerity, people are going to be reacting with less compassion, generosity, and creativity and problem solving. So I think what I'm saying is I think we cannot get to any solutions without understanding the range of voices, even voices we don't particularly want to hear from, as part of this. Michael, did you want to add to that?
I just want to say don't think this problem is. I don't have a solution right now, but that's why you're at a university. That's why you have young people. You're working on it. You got to name it and you got to get on it, and that's what we're doing. And we think of this as just like literally. I'm a climate person since 1985. There's a lot of deep ocean pumps running. This is one of the big ones, and we're just going to go look at it. We're not sure the North Atlantic current's going to flip yet. We know this one's flipping. All right, and we got to understand it and work on it. And so we don't have answers yet, but we're working on it. We're 7 months into this project, and everything you heard here is somewhat to some extent, except for IRAP, which has been running a little longer, is a result of that. So anyway, yeah.
Other questions or comments? And I have a feeling we may have to open the doors soon, but I'd love to get another voice from the audience. Over there.
Thank you. My name is James Carley. I'm a fundraiser for USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. But I live in North Carolina, where I also work on my town's planning board. And so what I see is a lot of, in terms of, well, long story short, a lot of people feel pinched by housing prices and a shortage of affordable housing. And there's an argument, okay, let's build more housing. Well, then you're going to get an angry crowd at the planning board meeting saying, NIMBY, I don't want that affordable housing unit going up behind my house where there's a beautiful strand of trees. Okay, so communities are resistant to building new housing in the first place, even though they all need it. And then the second one is, if you do get more housing in, people are going to say, well, that should go to the teachers and the firemen before we introduce the migrants. So that is an issue I've experienced in North Carolina, being on a planning commission locally, that I think is something that has to be addressed. And then you get into the deeper realm of, statewide changes to zoning laws to empower communities to accelerate the construction of new housing. And if people can feel more confident that they can afford a home, I think that will start to unlock a lot more compassion towards people who feel scarcity, or, it'll reduce the feeling of scarcity, because I think housing prices are driving, and energy prices also, are driving a huge sense of that resistance to sharing.
I echo the point that there is no solution without thinking deeply about local context and local solutions. And I see that Julia wants to be invited. Julia, can you still hear us? You wanted to be invited. Sorry, we didn't mean to exclude you. Did you want to add to the conversation?
No worries at all. I know we're running out of time. I had a few responses to some of the questions, but I guess I'll just say a common thread of all the questions is just like we need a major cultural change and overhaul in the way people are thinking, and I'm glad to see that Yale is working on narrative change. But I think like that's what the root of this is that we just need to figure out how people can have compassion for the people that are affected by all of this, and I hope that young people especially will get involved in this. And also support, the last speaker's suggestion that we build more housing. I think that will help all of the everybody impacted.
Thank you, Julia. All right, I think we have one last hand before.
Sure. Hi, my name is Allegra. I'm a YSC alum. Earlier in life, my research was looking at drivers of conflict, right, and exploring how climate change, populations that are trapped populations, and just neglect by national bodies and international community creates conflict and creates violence. Whether we're looking at these things from a environmental or public health or conflict lens, we're all interconnected, right? Problems that are happening in one area will spill over and affect everything else. And I wish that this country, which tends to be a little bit isolationist in its thinking, could remember that more. But we will sooner or later. And I think, in a time where there's such a tendency to be so reactionary, it's been tremendously heartening this week and during the sessions here, just to hear how much of a focus there is, especially in the international community, on planning sustainable development, really creating the infrastructure to handle what's coming down the pipeline instead of the sort of reactive mode that's too often the tendency in this country. So I hope we all come away from this feeling much more heartened for cooperation and moving forward.
Thank you. I think that's an incredibly constructive note on which to end, that if we can move away from reaction to thoughtful engagement, consensus building, and cooperation, and moving out of emergency mode into sustainable building mode. So we will have to end there, but we will hang out and speak with you further. Please do come up to us. Thank you for everyone who came, and we hope to work with you in the future. Thank you, everyone.